darkest night, yet thought I knew the way, the sin that promised joy in life had led.
Brock Turner, a former Stanford swimmer, sparked the nation's outrage this year when the judge rendered a shockingly lenient 6 months jail sentence for the felonious crimes of 1, assault with intent to rape an intoxicated woman, 2, sexually penetrating an intoxicated person with a foreign object, and 3, sexually penetrating an unconscious person, dumping, may I add, the body of the unconscious Stanford female victim outside in the trash bin. Brock's dad famously argued in the courtroom that 20 minutes of action does not deserve 20 years of imprisonment. Shocking, right? The outrage brings to bear the racial, economic, and social issues at play. If Brock is black, poor, and a high school dropout, would the judge also give Brock a 6-month jail sentence? Did the judge, in fact, issue a shockingly lenient sentence because Brock is white, rich, and a Stanford student? Given the current climate of racial tension in America today, would the outrage even be greater if the victim was not white in Palo Alto, but rather a minority from Oakland? Moving beyond the racial, social, and economic complex, the Brock case addresses the fundamental issue of fairness and justice. Did the punishment in this case fit the crime? Obviously, the outrage stems from the judge's sentencing. 6 months in jail for rape? What kind of a judge is that? Thankfully, the judge to decide our eternal destiny is not Brock Turner's judge, nor any other human judge. Our judge is God, holy, righteous, and perfect in all his ways. Therefore, his judgment of our eternal destiny must commensurately be holy, righteous, and perfect as well. John in Revelation chapter 14 reinforces the fundamental issue of fairness in God's judgment against unbelievers at the end of time. The unbelievers who are drunk from excessively drinking the wine of financial idolatry will suffer proportionately and befittingly their crime. Namely, God will make them drink wine as their judgment. Albeit it is a different wine now, no longer the wine of Babylon with its gold and silver and money, but rather now the wine of God's wrath with all his fire and brimstone. God's punishment, in other words, fits the crime, which is the title for this morning's sermon and the main idea. God's punishment fits the crime. Before handing out the punishment, Revelation 14 details for us the specifics of the crime. Foremost of the crime is idolatry. That is the worship of the beast, which is apparent for us in verse 9. Here's the crime. And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives the mark upon his forehead and upon his hand," that is the crime, idolatry. They worship the beast. They receive the mark of the beast. Significantly, the worship of the beast in the book of Revelation is the worship of the false Jesus. He is a beast because he's not a man, because the true man, the true Adam, the Son of Man is Jesus. And the beast falls short. He falls short because he tries to rule like Adam was supposed to rule by independence and disobedience from the Lord, whereas Jesus, he rules over all things by his dependence and obedience at the cross. And now he has dominion over all things by his resurrection from the dead. And so the beast then, in the book of Revelation, pretends to be like Jesus, pretends to have the same dominion as Jesus, but really he is nothing but a cheap imitation of Jesus, which is clear in Revelation chapter 13, verse 12, where the beast himself has a mini episode of a death and resurrection, just like Jesus. And he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound, the word here, whose death of wound was healed, was resurrected. The beast behaves like Jesus. He dies and resurrects like Jesus. Of course, he does not really die. He only had the appearance of death. But people will believe he actually died. And people will falsely believe that he is actually resurrected, but he's not. The beast, even in the verse prior to this, in verse 11, pretends to be like the Lamb. Jesus is the Lamb of God, but this beast passes himself off, or itself off as a lamb. In verse 11, then I saw another beast coming out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, but it spoke like the dragon. Remember, the dragon here is Satan. The purpose of the imitation is deception, which is clear in chapter 19, verse 20. And the beast was seized, and with him the false prophet. So it's imitation for deception, who performed the signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who had worshipped his image. So they were suckered into thinking that this beast is Jesus, but he is not. They were deceived and they worshiped the beast in falsehood, in idolatry. And these two were thrown into the lake of fire which burns with brimstone. If we recall, the background to the beast in Revelation is Daniel chapter 7, where Daniel sees a vision of four great beasts. And these four beasts begin to eat each other. And the last beast was the strongest of the beasts. And John was puzzled and he asked the Lord, Lord, what does this vision mean? What are these beasts? And Daniel is told, these four great beasts are the four kings which shall arise out of the earth. They're four human kingdoms. They try to rule by independence from the Lord. The fourth one will be the strongest one. But in stark contrast to the beast, God sends the man, not the beast, the man. And he will rule not by exerting his power, his will, his wisdom, his riches, but rather it says he came to the Ancient of Days and it was presented before him. He merely came. And the Ancient of Days gave to him glory and dominion and a kingdom that all peoples and nations and languages should serve him. The dominion that the beast tried to achieve but woefully falls short have been given to the man by virtue of his obedience and dependence upon God. So the beast then is in contrast to the Son of Man. He's a beast because he's not a human. He pretends to be one, but he's not. He tries to have dominion by his dependence, so he falls short. Jesus, on the other hand, is the true man who reigns and who rules by his death and resurrection at the cross. And Nebuchadnezzar, if you remember, thought that he was strong by his strength, that he was rich by his riches, that he was wise by his wisdom. If you remember last week, it says, "Have I not created Babylon for my glory, for my majesty? Is this not my doing?" Because Babylon was a superpower in those times. Babylon was like America, had all the nuclear weapons and all the wealth of the nations, and the nations feared Babylon, and the ruler of Babylon was Nebuchadnezzar, and he thought he was strong in himself. And the Lord humbled Nebuchadnezzar by making him into a beast. He's not a man. If you boast in yourself, you're not a man. You're not the kind of Adam that God intended. So he made Nebuchadnezzar grow furs and claws, and he begins to no longer walk on 2 feet. He began to crawl on 4 limbs. He couldn't talk. He grew fangs. He ate grass from the field. A beast, not a man. This is how unbelievers behave today. I am strong in my education. I don't need Jesus. I don't need the Bible to tell me what to do, whom to sleep with. I don't need the guilt of the church. None of that. I decide for myself. Those who think such, those who behave in such a way, have the mark of the beast, and they worship the beast. They're not the kind of humans that God intended. This is the crime. Arrogance, hubris, me, me, me. God therefore finds unbelievers guilty of worshiping the beast, trying to find joy and security and fulfillment in ourselves, independently from the Lord, not finding their joy and their security in Jesus, who is the true man. Instead, therefore, finding joy in Jesus, the unbelievers find their joy in materialism, in financial idolatry, which is the second crime that unbelievers are guilty of. Or to put it in terms of the book of Revelation, chapter 14, unbelievers are guilty of being drunks. They have drunk the wine, or they have drank the wine of Babylon, which is the world's financial system. We covered this last week, so I'll just briefly show them to you. In chapter 14, verse 8, fallen is the great Babylon. Remember, that comes from 2 places in the Old Testament. Which has given all the nations to drink from the wine of the wrath because of her fornication. To drink this wine is to drink, to be intoxicated with the world's pleasures. As we see in chapter 18, verse 3, "For the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality and have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality." The idea is, when you get drunk, your senses are dulled. You're no longer rational. And you foolishly begin to think that whatever decisions that you're making when you're drunk, it seems like a wise one, but when you're sober, you begin to think, why did I do that? That was really dumb. I shouldn't have done that. And so it is with unbelievers. They drink from Babylon. They become intoxicated with the pleasures of this world, so that they're so drunk that they would willingly choose money, success, family over Jesus Christ. Again, in chapter 18, verse 9, when the kings of the earth who committed the adultery with her and shared her luxury. The crime is drunkenness, and they're drunk with financial idolatry, so that they cannot rationally choose Jesus. They would instead irrationally choose money over Jesus. Now, God's punishment for unbelievers fits the crime. Since they like to commit the crime of drinking the wine of financial security here on earth, God punishes them in kind, proportionately. He will make them drink wine also. This time, not the wine of Babylon, but the wine of the cup of God's wrath in hell for all eternity, as verse 10 shows us. Then he will make them drink from the wine of God's wrath, which has been mixed in full strength in the cup of his great anger. The imagery here of the wine of God's wrath indicates a thorough consumption of the judgment. It means completion, wholeness, absolute saturation. In the same way, a drunk person is totally consumed by the effects of the alcohol. And that metaphor is very common in the Old Testament. For instance, in Psalm 75, verse 8, for a cup is in the hand of the Lord, and the wine foams. It is well mixed. He pours out of this. Surely all of the wicked of the earth must drain and drink down its dregs. So you drink from the wine of the world. The Lord responds by making you drink the wine of His wrath. And His wine, it's not Stella Rosa, like 4% alcohol. His wine is full strength. It's more like vodka than wine. I don't know what the strongest drinks are, but it is strong. Full, 100% wrath. John reinforces the idea of complete, total judgment with a metaphor of the wine of God's wrath in Revelation chapter 16, verse 19. The great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and Babylon the great was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of His fierce wrath. Again, in chapter 19, verse 15, I couldn't put it there because of space constraints. I'll just read it for you. You guys may write it down for your own reference. For his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron, and he will tread the winepress of his fierce wrath, the wrath of God, the Almighty. So the punishment then is that he will make them drink the cup of his full wrath. Indeed, the punishment in God's case fits the crime. The unbelievers who incessantly and who are addicted alcoholics, so they cannot stop from drinking in the world's financial security, God will make them drunk even more when He comes. But this time, not with worldly financial things, but rather this time with a cup of the wine of His wrath. The outcome of God's fitting punishment against unbelievers is eternal torment with fire and brimstone. And I will show you, or at least I will try, that this eternal torment also is a punishment that fits the crime. In chapter 14, verse 10, and he will torment them with fire and brimstone before the holy angels and before the Lamb. The metaphor for fire in the book of Revelation is likely not literal but figurative, which does not mean that hell is figurative, but I believe in this case the fire here is the same way it's used in Revelation chapter 1, verse 14, and his head and his hair were like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. Obviously, we don't think that Jesus' eyes are fire, but it just means that his eyes can see everything, so that Jesus qualifies to judge every human being. So the eye of fire indicates judgment. He can see through things. He burns through the facades and the false moralities. He can see through our church attendance. He can see through our outward display of appearances that we may be righteous outside, but inwardly we are wicked in our hearts. His eyes can see through that. It burns through that. Also in Revelation chapter 2, verse 18, the Son of Man, whose eyes like a flame of fire. I think that in this instance, in chapter 14, verse 10, the fire could be both figurative and literal. Because the fire, to be sure, in the book of Revelation, indicates the consuming judgment of God. In the same way fire consumes everything, it destroys everything, so it is with the fire of God's judgment. For instance, in Revelation chapter 20, verse 9, and they came up on the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city, and fire came down from heaven and devoured them, consumed them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. God's judgment is eternal torment because the unbelievers who place their security in money, in idols for their satisfaction, will no longer have access to their idols and to their money when Jesus returns, because Jesus will destroy them. And when they could no longer rely upon their money and their idols, now that they're gone, it creates anxiety, and their anxiety creates turmoil. And as we shall learn next week, they will not have rest day and night, because that which they find their joy in, their security in, is gone. Like a baby who has a security blanket, the baby cannot sleep without the blanket. That blanket is theirs, it is their comfort. Without it, they have no joy. And so it is on the day of judgment. Jesus, He will take away their security blanket, and they will not have sleep, rest, day and night, because their security was never in Jesus, but in the blanket of the world. And they have turmoil instead. This torment will get so bad that they would rather die. They would ask for death, but death will not be given to them. They will suffer in misery forever. In Revelation chapter 9, verse 5, and their torment was like a torment of a scorpion when it stings a man, and in those days men will seek death and will not find it. Apparently, the sting of a scorpion is one of the most painful things you can experience. It's so painful that others would rather die than to go through it. The same idea here, the torment, the pain of having their idols consumed by the fire of God. It'll create a similar turmoil that they would rather die, but death will not be given to them. Their security and money and luxury will precisely become the reason for their torment. In chapter 18, verse 7, we see, and as much as she exalted herself and lived in sensual luxury, to this extent give her torment and grief, because she said to herself, I rule as queen and am no widow. I will never experience grief. I am rich. I rule. My joy is in my money. And Jesus says, give her torment. How? Take away her money. remove her blanket. In verse 15, the merchants of these things, the financial security of the world, who become rich by her or from her, will stand at a distance because of the fear of her torment, weeping and mourning. When Jesus returns, He will remove our earthly security, our health and our wealth, and in creation itself will be destroyed. And it will result for unbelievers the horrific realization that they will never find security now. My joy has been in my money. My joy has been in my Facebook. I would rather check Instagram than pray. What am I going to do now that Instagram is gone? Torment. Because their security has never been in Jesus. So panic will set in once those things are gone. Torment ensues, and misery takes place forever and ever. Perhaps a visual comparison may help drive the point before we draw to a close. The crime and the punishment, to see how fitting the punishment is, the crime that unbelievers continue to commit. The crime is this: they drink the wine of financial idolatry from the beast. And the punishment, they will drink the wine of God's wrath with fire and brimstone. You want to get drunk? Fine. Your judgment is even more drunkenness. It's not Stella Rosa, 4%. It's 100% pure wrath. The crime, secondly, they're drunk out of their minds to find security in their health and wealth, which are only temporary. The punishment, they'll be drunk with God's judgment because their security has not been in Christ, who alone satisfies for all eternity. Not temporary. And finally, the crime is they worship and receive the mark of the beast. And the punishment for such a crime is they will suffer eternal torment because they will remain beasts forever, never becoming man. 666, never reaching 7, like Nebuchadnezzar, who became a beast, thinking that he was strong in himself. And this anxiety of knowing that they will never find joy, they will never find satisfaction, will create an everlasting torment. The punishment fits the crime. You never loved Jesus anyways? God will judge you by not giving you Jesus for all eternity. Separation from Him. As we close, let us be challenged with the following. God's punishment for the crime of not finding our comfort and security in Jesus now is that we will not find our comfort and security in Jesus forever. If that's your crime, then God simply hands you over to your crime. If Jesus is not your joy and that's your crime, then your punishment is Jesus will not be your joy. And you will never be happy. You will never be satisfied because joy is only found in Jesus. God's reward for finding our comfort and security in Jesus now is that our comfort and our security will be in Jesus forever. What makes heaven great? Why is it worth getting up early in the morning to go to church? What is our reward? Is it streets of gold? Is it the mansions? In my Father's house are many mansions. Ooh, I want to go to heaven because I want to have a big house. What is our reward for the saints who died for Jesus? For the first century Christians who were eaten by lions, what is their reward? Is it like the Muslims who have 7 virgins? What's our reward? Our reward is Jesus. Not gold, not silver, not crowns, but His presence for all eternity. So you better find Jesus as your joy now, because heaven is just about Jesus, His presence, which satisfies. Therefore, find your comfort in Jesus' death and resurrection now, so that Jesus will forever be our joy and our reward. The punishment and the reward have to be proportionate. God is just. He is righteous. If your crime is you don't love Jesus, your punishment is you will not love Jesus. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send His Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through Him. Whoever believes in Him is not condemned, and whoever believes in Him is already condemned, because he has not believed in the name of the only Son of God. And this is their judgment, John says. The light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light, because their works are evil. What is your judgment? Unbelief. You don't want to believe in Jesus? Your judgment, you will not believe in Jesus. The punishment fits the crime. But if you love Jesus, if you trust in Him and hope in Him, your reward is Jesus Himself. An Oklahoma mother of 4, Patricia Spotted Crow, learned firsthand how a small time pot bust can completely derail an offender's life. She sold $31 worth of pot, marijuana, and her prison sentence, 12 years in prison. In the 2 years she has been incarcerated, she has only seen her children twice. What's more, her good behavior behind bars, including completing her GED, her GED rather, has not reduced her sentence at all. So you have Brock Turner raping a woman, leaving her body unconscious in the trash bin outside a Stanford apartment. He gets 6 months in jail? Really? And you have a mother of 4 sells $31 worth of pot, get 12 years in prison? The punishment does not fit the crime. It's disproportionate. Something is wrong. Thankfully, our judge is not human. Our judge is not biased. Our judge is perfect, holy, righteous in all His ways. And His judgment, therefore, must be commensurately, most assuredly, also be righteous, perfect, and holy of every human being. If we love Jesus, we get Jesus. If you don't love Jesus, we do not get Jesus. We'll be in hell for all eternity. God is fair. God is righteous. Come to His Son. Turn away from sin. Treasure Jesus above all things. And you will have the great reward, greater than money, greater than a family, greater than having children, greater than marriage, greater than home ownership, greater than anything else. You will have Jesus, and you'll be eternally satisfied now. Let's bow our heads in prayer.